It's almost like we're seeing in real life, in real terms, what matters. And it really isn't the stock market.
Hey Lawrence,
Hey Josh.
I've been thinking about the podcast. How about in the first series we focus on the pandemic?
Yeah, and in each episode we can ask our guest how it's been affecting them and what they do.
We could ask people to join in with the hashtag #PosNegative.
How would we introduce it each week?
Or just say, welcome to Positive Negative. For my second conversation and our third episode, I spoke to Anna Myers, Executive Director of the Whistleblowing International Network. We shared office space for a short time a year or so ago, and I'd hoped we would be able to collaborate at some point in the future. Given the field she works in, I thought her perspective on the pandemic and everything that's going on right now would be really interesting to include here. So here's our conversation, recorded on Good Friday.
My name is Anna Myers, and I am the Executive Director of the Whistleblowing International Network, and I'm based here in Glasgow, Scotland. I'm originally from Canada, and I'm a lawyer, so I qualified in Canada and then requalified in England. So I was in London for about 18 years. Mm-hmm. And basically through, I guess, a bit of serendipity and just following things that interested me, ended up having a career in whistleblowing law and practice. So I joined an NGO, a nonprofit law center, legal advice center in London in 2000. So when my daughter's now 21, was like not just under a year. Mm-hmm. So I count her age for how long I've been in the field. And it was called Public Concern at Work. It's now called Protect. And it was the only legal advice service for whistleblowers in the UK. And it had been set up sort of in the British context to try and provide employment protection for those who speak up in the interest of others. And it came out really of a number of disasters in the UK. I know we've had lots since, but the Piper Alpha oil rig that blew up on the coast of Scotland, actually, where many workers lost their lives. And when they did an inquiry, they found that people had known about the safety risks and either were too scared to speak up, they were on short-term contracts, or were unsure of what to do. And then there were some other ones like the Clapham rail crash and the Herald of Free Enterprise, great name, the ferry that sank off the coast of Zeebrugge. And in each case, there were royal inquiries that found that people had known things, either had tried to say something, and it got lost in middle management, didn't get up to the top, didn't go outside. And so this was a real attempt to address that. And law is one thing. So as a lawyer, I definitely appreciate the legal parameters. But certainly in the field of whistleblowing, if you have to take a claim, it's because everything's gone wrong. You've raised something and you've either been dismissed or in some way suffered a detriment. And so it was fascinating work. And I got into that early on in sort of my legal career, although I had been a mature student anyway. So it was all a bit later. And in that time, we got contacted by NGOs around the world. And I think, partly by being Canadian and having also learned French in Quebec and realizing there were sort of two legal systems, and then moving across to Britain, which was supposedly, the same legal system, and realizing actually they had developed differently. There were certain things that had been changed in the English system that were still treated as very, very important in the Canadian system, and that in each country power works differently, and what you look to for redress or accountability is very different based on institutional mechanisms, but also culture and how things have developed. So Parliament here, and the role of the police here, and regulators, and how the government is very central in many ways. And it's a smaller country, so you can sort of watch the government much more carefully than you would say in the Canadian context. It's sitting in Ottawa, far away from everybody. There's provincial powers that are stronger. Here we have the devolved governments. So it's, you start to realize that, whistleblowing is about who do you go to, who's responsible, how do you get the information there, and how do you ensure that someone can explain that conduct, and if they can't explain it and there's been wrongdoing, they're held to account for it, will be different in the different structures. Mm-hmm. And we were getting lots of calls from not international organizations, but other civil society organizations around the world who were interested in this issue, were talking about it in very, very different contexts, like Nigeria or in South Africa, in Germany, in Chile, all these places where people could see it and could see the value of it, and were interested in talking about how do you get citizens to engage in their democracies, how do you get citizens to help stop corruption, how do you protect those citizens if they do speak up. And so eventually, through sort of, again, kind of following what interested me, leaving public concern at work, and doing some work in Europe and different bodies that actually allowed me to travel and meet civil society, which I did kind of on my own, doing these meetings through the UN, and then finding out who was doing the work on the ground and going and talking to them. It seemed really important to start sharing what we were already trying to share loosely, in a network where we brought this expertise. And some of it is 40 years old. One of the longest standing organizations in our network, the Government Accountability Project, was set up in '79 post Pentagon Papers and Watergate. So they have 40 years or more of that kind of experience of thinking about these issues. And then with the pandemic, it's very, very interesting to see how these organizations are responding and what the issues are going to be longer term. So that's what I do. And yeah, I've worked at home for many years before finally getting office space in Glasgow 2 years ago. And so when this happened and they were saying you have to go home, I was thinking, oh no, I'm just so delighted now to have finally separated home and work. And now I'm going to be back at home again. So my first reaction, which was, yes, of course, let's go to our homes and work. And but it was surprising. My first reaction was, I'm not going to enjoy this. But in fact, surprisingly, I have.
So what have you enjoyed about the lockdown and, the kind of change to normality?
Well, I guess there's a couple of things. One is obviously having done a lot of work from home over the last sort of, I would say, 6 or 7 years. In some ways, I'm very used to sitting down somewhere in the house with my computer and doing that work. I think because I did that, not really intending to do it, it took a while to have a routine. And sometimes I paid work and sometimes I didn't. So I guess the difference is this time I know, WIN is a charity registered in Scotland. We've got a couple of staff. We're not big. We have 2 full-time staff and 2 part-time staff. So I do have a job every day. So that's probably a big difference, that there's a kind of structure right there. I have other people. I'm not just self-employed and trying to do that work to deliver to people who aren't really looking directly at my job. And I think the other thing that has been kind of great is, even though I'm used to working remotely in the sense that we talk to our members all around the world, we're online a lot. I do get tired eyes from being on the computer. But for the team, in a strange way, again, it's been really organized since we've not had the office to meet and kind of chat in. We're talking to each other regularly. We're sort of in communication during the day and having conversations and kind of making the effort to do that, which is probably both to do professionally, but also knowing that people are, one of my staff members lives alone, so you're sort of aware that it's better to talk. So we talk and message each other. So I sort of have a feeling that the team is coalesced in a really strange way. Because we've had a team meeting last week, and we might just have quick ones to kind of recap. We tended to have them every 3 weeks, or not, go through big work questions. Now we're kind of more, I guess everything's become a bit more immediate. What are we doing now? Not what's the longer term. But I'm very aware we need to prepare for the longer term.
And what about personally? I mean, do you feel, has it been a positive thing for you and your family? Or I don't want that question to sound flippant.
Yes. No. The first thing, first of all, I mean, I guess the big thing for everybody is whether you know anyone who's ill or particularly vulnerable to illness. And the sort of positive side is it's not as if they're just isolating, we're all isolating. So again, making that effort to call parents and do that. I have parents far away, so I guess the worry for me is my mum's in sheltered housing, and they've identified 2, maybe 4 of the people in the more serious care part. So she's her own independent flat. So she's a bit separate from that, but it's in that facility. So that's the worry, that they actually, that if something happened, I wouldn't be able to go. So for people for whom that is a reality, it must be awful. On the other hand, if you're just trying to keep people sort of company, they do know that they're not the only ones in the same situation. I think the second sort of realization once I sort of transferred home was that my daughter was going to be home. So my 15-year-old isn't going to school, but she's been great, self-directed. We've kind of planned our days together. So we know when we stop and I know when I'm going to wake her up, and with her teenage brain, we're kind of letting her sleep in a bit, and then she gets to work, on her school stuff, and it's all online, and she seems to be able to do that quite well. She already was somebody who could entertain herself and was interested in things. Her older sister, who's at Oxford University, again in Canada, had, similarly was able to do that, which I think is more about my husband being the main home carer, and sort of his style was that they did, got on with things alone and together, and so they have strength in that. It may be personality, but I think also if I'd been the home carer, they would have had me talking at them a lot and interrupting them, so they might not have developed these skills so well. So there's that. And we meet for yoga, and then we have lunch, and we're kind of, again, we've gone out every day on great cycle rides up and down hills around Glasgow, and that's been really fun. We're in an area where there's some big houses and big hills, and so it's not crowded. And we both learned how to free cycle without our hands, so that's been great fun. So there's that. I found really good. Now we're on holiday. I don't know what school holidays are when you haven't moved. So
yeah, it's strange, isn't it?
Again, so it's interesting how things are changing, even in a kind of weirdly stagnant phase. So routines are changing through some external reasons, and probably internal as well. The other side personally is my husband just got a job, went sort of back to work after looking after the kids for a long time, and really was just taking a job in the civil service to kind of ease back in. And it was a 1-year contract, and suddenly he's now a key worker and has a full-time contract, and so he's out of the house every day. Which is a complete switch. So that was a very strange outcome, that suddenly I'm at home, he's at work, and his job is essential. It's not essential in the sense of health and the kind of frontline services in that way, but all the government promises about what they're going to deliver, they need people to do that, to do that work, and it'll be payments and all sorts of things going out to citizens and to people, not just, all the population, and to businesses. So he'll be one of those just kind of workers doing the admin with all of that. So that's interesting. And then there's a little worry too, because he's out more and with people, and so I'm more aware of wiping down handles and doing all of that. But who knows? You have that sense that if you're going to get it in some way, you're going to get it. You do what you can, but you're not sure how far to go.
Yeah, I know. Every time when I go to the shops, when I get back from the shops, I kind of look at the bags of shopping and think, right, now what do I need to wash everything? Do I I wash my hands first of all, but then I don't know where to put the shopping. Do I put it on the table, or do I leave it on the floor? And then it's a real kind of
so those just you're not really sure how far to go, and there's lots to read. You're sort of reading more about the front line, so people who are really in contact with people. It's more a niggle, but that's only because nobody we know is ill yet, and when it suddenly then when if they are, if then it may be too late for,
Yeah.
you know, it's already in the house. So there's just been, you know, that kind of thing, that the kind of daily routine has been quite good. The relations with staff has been good. We've kind of, I mean, it could be that we're all focusing and getting work done because we have the time, and it has reduced the noise in our lives. You know, it's reduced all the bits of travel that I was doing, all the preparing for that travel, and then the time that takes. You know, now I'm just doing the things that we said we were already going to do. So we're playing catch up on getting information sorted, getting things drafted. There's lots happening around the world on whistleblowing, and has been happening. And so in a sense, it's a time to really focus on our output.
Yeah, I would imagine that the kind of companies that need to have a whistleblower kind of shouting about what's happening, I would imagine they're making the most of this situation. You know, while we're all kind of looking in one direction, I would imagine that they're kind of getting the not so good things done in the background. Is that true? And does that mean that you're even busier now, or that you potentially will be?
Yeah, I mean, we're aware. We've had a couple of meetings. So one of the things that was great was within the network, there's things that we will promote because we can see a lot of the trends happening. We have a WIN listserv, and so the different organizations share information. We're also just kind of connected, and I'm connected after 20 years in the field. So people let me know about things, and I'm aware of trends both in sort of the journalism world and the human rights world, and you know, even in Scotland with the defamation law reform, which would be really important for whistleblowers, and it would be important as a signal to the rest of the world if they do put a public interest defense into the defamation law here. That would be great. It's not just for journalists, it's for whistleblowers, and whistleblowers who might be sources to journalists. So journalists being able to protect themselves is one of the ways to protect whistleblowers. So there's all of that stuff that was going on, and keeping track of it all is really hard. So there's kind of figuring out that stuff. But I think there was a group within the network, but not sort of what they were within other networks too, who we did a coalition statement and then published that on different websites. And it was really just coming together to say, we're aware that, you know, in some countries, and you know, health, it's really the frontline stuff that we're hearing about. So that's what the journalists are reporting. That's what people are speaking up about, because it's an instant, you know, there might be an immediate threat to the patient's safety and the safety of workers around this whole PPE. You know, governments are scrambling all over the world to respond to this and have the right equipment, and whether they didn't plan properly or kind of deliberately ignored it, or just, you know, have so many other public services that they, you know, are on their knees anyway, that they didn't have the resources to particularly plan for a pandemic. We're aware that health workers and doctors are speaking up in different parts of the world, and some of them are being silenced. And some of them have been, you know, dismissed or fired. That's, you know, in our country, it's not so much that. There's there is some of those cases, but there's also more a sense that maybe hospitals are telling people not to use social media, not to talk about the different things. Because again, it's that, I guess that there's some of that managing it, and then over managing it. So yes, you don't want to create fear and create panic, but at the same time, you don't want to not keep, you know, information should be out there because people need to know how to keep themselves safe. And then there is the real issue about, you know, workers in particular positions who are, you know, it's unsafe. It's unsafe for patients, or it's unsafe for them. And, you know, we hear a lot on the social care side too. So we're hearing those kind of stories, some of them in different parts of the world being stronger than others. And so there was about 50 plus organizations, many of them within the Whistleblowing International Network, signed this coalition statement calling on governments to protect whistleblowers and calling on citizens to responsibly, but not, and populations to speak up if they think there is wrongdoing and abuses of power and things being taken advantage of at this time too, when, as you say, people aren't looking. So there's those kind of things. But what is interesting, I would say, is that it's not like whistleblowers are calling for advice right now. I think a lot of people are at home. I think what we're preparing for is when things ease up and the recovery starts, which whenever that happens, I'm not suggesting it's happening immediately, or if it goes on a long time and people start to see what's really happening. But as they go back to work or don't go back to work, as these as the fallout is felt and the impact really happens, I think that's when our organizations are going to get the calls. And they're going to want to know what their rights are and so unions, I think, unions and journalists right now are probably on the pulse a little bit more than the whistleblowing organizations in terms of cases, but we're very aware of what's already weak in our systems to protect people, very aware that things are rumbling, very aware that, yes, there are restrictions on all of us, and yes, they're important and there's good reasons to do them, but watching the space in which governments might be putting in emergency powers or even corporations, taking action now that we wouldn't let them do normally. And then, so actions can kind of start to become normalized very quickly. And we're somewhere else after the pandemic. I'm sure we will be somewhere else, but we don't want to be in a really difficult position in terms of accountability. So that's where we're starting to see much more sharing across all sorts of the networks, the journalist networks, the human rights networks, and the whistleblowing networks.
So I'm just thinking in terms of inspiring stories or actions that you've seen since the pandemic has started. Are there any that stand out?
I mean, I think, like, I sort of go, we've talked, I tend to talk a lot about work, but the personal side, I think, has been how many people feel, kind of calmer and focused. I think that's, in a sense, that calmness, some people who've had some real difficulties, and I know it can be the exact opposite for other people, but say people who've had some, some mental health issues and are almost calmer, it's like bigger. This is bigger than many of our individual problems. So there's that. Of course, there are people for whom it really is exacerbating the problems they already have. I think I've just people being so far very, very cooperative and very helpful, and people are starting to do things that they haven't done and sounding really happy about doing them. Whether it's for me, it's also been doing sourdough bread, just like something I wanted to do for so long, and finally doing it. And it's like I can go and check my starter, anytime I'm not at work. It's a crazy thing. It's like feeding some weird beast and worrying about it. But so I think the inspiring stories are that I'm getting inspired by my friends and by the people I work with, just how focused they are and how enthusiastic they are about carrying on with this work, and personally just carrying on in supporting each other and talking to each other. There's been some great humor and stories, sharing jokes and sharing frustrations, and some of it's been hilarious. And I think the things that I've found most inspiring was just how much, we might have taken 2 weeks, I think, to kind of understand where we were at, and how much people have sort of said, it's become clear that the work is important, and they're doing stuff. They're sharing information, and they're picking up the stories, and they're trying to do, even if they're in lockdown, they're really trying to reach out to the vulnerable groups and say, we're here when you need us.
And in what ways do you hope that all of this will shape the future?
It can, I always think every situation will have the positives and the negatives. I think, again, whistleblowing is really about people speaking up so that decisions that have been made or the way power is operated can be questioned, and sometimes it's about deliberate wrongdoing, sometimes it's about harm. It tends to be on the more serious level, but it tends to show where the problems are. So I think we've had a period, and I think this is really interesting. We're having this, we used to see each other in the workplace, we're having this meeting by Zoom. Everybody's on the internet. Zoom, you know, has already gotten in trouble by the lack of privacy, and you know, it's showing that the need to be able to continue to communicate is so important. Information to keeping yourself healthy is so important. To keeping your community healthy is so important. So we've got this need for more information, need for more connection. But the problems that existed before the pandemic around how much that was actual, you know, privacy for us to be able to talk to each other, knowing that everything we do isn't monetized and isn't part of a surveillance operation. You know, there's two sides to every coin. We want to help people. We want to be able to have the information about how the pandemic moves, but is that tracking everybody's movement through their phones, you know, going to be a real problem? You know, so that there is a real concern about how this gets shaped, and if we can shape it within what the value is for the community and what that value is for people to have rights and freedoms, then great. If we can also see that there's, you know, so many workers who are so precarious. I mean, the numbers of unemployed in the US is shocking, but not surprising. If people are can be fired at will. You know, that's not surprising. In this country, how many people were on 0 hours contract or freelance that wouldn't have been freelance? You know, you might not have been freelance 15 years ago. I might not have spent, you know, 6 years doing freelance work, you know, 30 years ago. I might, as a woman, I might not have had the job, but in another way, you know, people had security. And one of the things seeing is there is no, you know, so many people didn't have security. And the whistleblowing I've seen happen was, you know, some of the whistleblowing was on things that were changing and moved out and were legalized and normalized. So you can't really blow the whistle. It's legal now to, you know, to not provide a lot of the safety net that we've had. A lot of that was deconstructed by the, you know, some of the same government that's in power now, saying that the National Health Service is so important. And, you know, there was austerity for years before this. And the systems that have been called up are all the social networks, the social safety nets that are important. And they're not just safety nets. They're about working, what's the word, so that you can work and maintain a society well, that we can be healthy and that we can be educated and that we can be, if we're vulnerable, we take care of each other. So this just shows it up instantly. It's like, I mean, it's been 3 weeks, and as far as I can see, every weakness in the system has been shown. That's what the system is running in to fill, as if it's, you know, and all that money they're saying could have been money spent over time, not money thrown last minute. So it'd be really interesting. It's such an opportunity to say the balance is wrong and let's get it right. Whether that's taken, and whistleblowing will be part of that with a wider group because it's about protecting the public interest, and it's a discussion about, well, okay, what is the public interest? You know, what is the public interest in the economy built the way it's been built, or is it a different system? So I mean, that kind of, and I don't think I think what it's happened is it's made it real. It's not just theory. You know, if we all had a basic income, we'd all be fine. You know, we could handle it. Some of us really, really don't have that anyway, month to month. So now we have nothing, just instantly.
So what do you think we can do as citizens to make sure that on the other side of this, I mean, we've all seen how, like you said, it's often the most poorly paid, or the most overworked, or the most precariously positioned people that are doing doing a lot of the legwork right now. What can we do as citizens to make sure that the government and the powers that be change so that those people are respected and rewarded,
Valued,
and valued? What can we do you think?
Well, I think it's about, I think a little bit, so you were asking me about inspiring stories, and I was kind of sort of thinking of my network, but I think I did hear something, you know, just someone who said that they, on the radio really, and saying that they'd taken a job in the supermarket. And I think, we've got I don't know about you, but when I took summer jobs, they were, and when a lot of us took summer jobs, even if we came from families that, it was probably pretty clear we would go to university, we didn't have university kind of jobs, summer jobs. They were in local supermarkets or waitressing or working in factories or even picking fruit or tree planting.
Mm-hmm.
And I get a sense there's a whole generation that just doesn't do that work, and some of them are now doing it. There's a whole level of people who might be doing manual labor again, filling in the gap. And if we can take the knowledge of that the work that drives, that keeps society going is every level. It's the cleaning staff and the social care staff and all those people, they're so important, and we don't value that properly. And I think there's so many of them now. It's not just, as I said, it's you and me and people who have, more than one degree perhaps, who are not getting jobs and are not getting security. It's too bad it takes for it to be so widespread amongst them for us to say there's a problem. Maybe there'll be a little bit of awareness now that all of these levels of our, economies and our communities are deeply important. Maybe some people will understand what it's like to work in a bloody supermarket or work in, it's valuable work. There's nothing, it's important work. And I think that, we need to, so I think it's the people that are experiencing it who need to really push. But it is hard. I think one of the other aspects I was going to say is one of the things I see in my community, whether it's, maybe we're just optimists and that's why we do this work. But I do see a kind of connecting that's happening. Power has connected, corporate power is certainly connected, and certain aspects of government power connected across borders. But we are too, and I think it's bringing some of the stuff where people feel out of, even governments being kind of more aware of their GDP than actually what the GDP is made up of. Just having high stocks and money flowing through your country that doesn't really get out to everybody is yes, you might have high GDP, but the quality of that GDP isn't great. And I think that because the third sector and charities are starting to talk internationally more and more and more, we can make the trends and we can talk to power at that level and say, I'm not saying everything has to return to the nation state, but it does, it does have to resonate here what we can do and stop feeling so powerless even with our governments, and our governments stop being so powerless against kind of what this seems to be like, this system that is out of their control too. We do, right now they're doing what they need to do for the people on the ground. Yes, we do. So I think I'm hopeful that it's almost like we're seeing in real life, in real terms, what matters, and it really isn't the stock market.
Yes.
Or stock value. That's not the biggest piece. You're hearing about it, but you're not hearing about it the way we used to hear about it all the time a month ago.
Okay, so I should have asked you this probably earlier on. How are you feeling today?
Today, I'm I guess maybe the fact that it's like Good Friday and there's supposedly a long weekend. I feel discombobulated. I had a really, about this thing about people being on holiday. I'm finding it really weird. But then I'm thinking, well, actually, I could take a day off. So that was exciting. I'm feeling excited that I will take Monday off. And I will take Tuesday, which is even not part of the Easter holidays, as in the working one, to have my daughter's birthday.
Oh, nice.
And that's great. So I guess I haven't worked out how to actually I could easily use my time and not work, but I haven't sort of given myself a chance to do that even during the work week. So I'm sort of going, I have annual leave that I was supposed to take. I could actually take some of it plus my weekends. So that's kind of nice. So yeah, I'm feeling a bit like I do need a couple of days now. We've had 3 weeks. So we
I think
had,
it's 3,
yeah. And I think that's, first week kind of la la la, what's going on. Second week it coming together. Third week pretty good until now, and now I'm tired. So I think it's about regrouping a little bit. Yeah, so I'm kind of looking forward to the weekend.
Okay, so are there any questions that you'd like to have been asked that I didn't is there anything that you think it would be good to mention, or that I didn't kind of give you the opportunity?
No, I think what's so interesting is, no, I just think it's because my work is international and I'm always kind of thinking big picture, it's the middle stuff is gone. So the kind of running around and talking to everybody about everything has kind of gone. So it's like, I feel like my life is, the world has become it's like having a baby, right? Where it comes right down to the essentials. You're really aware of a little chin, and you're so focused on that little face, and then they start to run around, you start to look up, and then the world gets really busy. And so now I feel like it's like being dropped right back into the minutia of life. I wake up, I'm aware I'm waking up, all that kind of stuff, what we're having for lunch, and keeping all of that going. And with time to think about it without noise, and then time to think about the big picture stuff. It's sort of like a bit calming.
It does feel a bit like it's a bit slower, and
and if we can keep that up, I think it's good for our health. But that would be nice if we all came out of this kind of going, everyone needs some time. But I don't know. I've read that after every crisis we tend to go very quickly back to our old bad habits. Even though I like to think that maybe I'll learn something, or other people, I hope I learn something out of this.
Yeah, I guess as individuals, if we can, we can't. That society will probably lurch backwards, or in a direction we maybe don't want it to. But I guess as individuals, that's all we're responsible for. So I guess if we can make sure that we at least keep some of the good habits that we're starting to instill,
and maybe encourage them in people around us. Like I do think as a boss, and I'm a boss of a very small, like it's a big network with a small number of staff, and I'm, in some ways I'm learning how to be a boss anyway, but I want to encourage them to take the time they need, and so getting some of those good habits in now, for them, for me, that would be good. They're not working all the time.
Yeah. Now, get a much better work-life balance it's kind of been forced on us a little bit. I mean, I'll say that as someone if I had 5 children, I wouldn't be saying that, I don't think. Or, if I knew someone that was sick, or, if I was a key worker, I wouldn't be saying. I don't know if that's true.
Recognizing a great deal of privilege in this situation, and I think the other thing is, the charities who are looking, like we don't really know how our funders, we've kind of got funding to the end of the year. Don't know, don't know if normal funding that would get next year is still on the cards for them, what their portfolios are like, whether they're going to push off funding for this year, for next year, and therefore things that you would normally, like, is it going to take, so that kind of thing too. Again, I haven't got to some of the issues yet that I'm sure will be, you come to these things sort of as they are happening. So some of that planning, I think the next month we'll be trying to just touch base, so that when people know what's happening, or what things are likely, then they'll know where they're going to be too. But at the same time, I'm not, we can't rush any of this.
Thanks for listening to Positive Negative.
Don't forget, you can follow us on Twitter @PosNegative, or find us on Facebook.
And join in the conversation using the hashtag #PosNegative.
You can help us to grow by leaving us a review and sharing this episode with your friends and followers.
You'll also find links to what we've talked about in the show notes, or by visiting positivenegativepodcast.com.